Hello everyone, I'm Ankit and in today's video we'll try to understand everything relating to India's manufacturing sector. But why are we dealing with manufacturing sector in this video? The answer to this curiosity lies in the UPSC syllabus. Because if you see the UPSC syllabus, particularly for mains examination in GS paper 3, there's this mention of changes in industrial policy and its effect on industrial growth. Now, the Indian government is trying to make India an Atmanirbhar Bharat. That is, in English, it means self-reliant India. So for India to be a self-reliant nation, naturally you would expect India should scale up its manufacturing sector. Right? And also if you look at mains examination for the past years, you'll see that in 2017, a question directly appeared on India's manufacturing sector and how it impacts India's growth prospects, particularly the India's gross domestic product. So let us try to understand the various nuances, shortcomings of India's manufacturing sector, and let us start this with the help of this particular table. Now if you see the contribution of various sectors, that is primary, tertiary as well as secondary, and in their contribution to India's employment, you will find that the major portion of India's workforce, that is 45%, they are employed in agricultural related activities. On the other hand, the second most share is cornered by India's service sector, which represents 30% of total workforce, whereas the least amount of people, they are involved in industrial related activities, that is just 25%. So naturally, if India were to become a developed nation, you'll try to understand that India's employment or India's workforce needs to be employed in a more productive activity. And what is more productive than agricultural sector? It is industrial as well as service sector. So one of the reasons why the government is trying to make India a manufacturing hub is to gather or is to promote employment in India, particularly shift the people from agricultural sector to the manufacturing sector. Also, the contribution of manufacturing sector in India's GDP currently is about 17 to 18%. So this is what the contribution of manufacturing is in India's GDP. So naturally, not just you want to create more employment in the manufacturing sector, but you also want to increase the share of manufacturing sector in India's GDP, right? So this is the entire topic why the government wants to increase India's manufacturing sector. Now there are many benefits of why should any country become a manufacturing hub. So let us try to understand all of these benefits one by one. The first and most important benefit that I've already highlighted is the prospects of employment generation, because manufacturing sector in general provides both kind of direct as well as indirect jobs. For example, the automobile sector, which started in India after the introduction of Maruti cars, which was done back in 1980s. And since then, the nascent automobile sector has become a major portion of India's GDP, as millions of people, both directly and indirectly employed by companies like Maruti, Hyundai, Tata, etc., which create a lot of employment generation in India. Also, you must have heard about a city located very near to Delhi called as Gurgaon. So the entire development of Gurgaon can be traced back to the setting up of Maruti factory back in 1980s. So this is how a manufacturing sector has the potential to create millions and millions of employment generation. And you understand this is very necessary, especially because India has the world's largest demographic dividend now, as a large amount of people, they are in their work age, and therefore you need to provide employment to that people. The second factor is the prospects of economic growth. That is, by providing jobs to millions and millions of people and undertaking jobs in the economically productive sector, you will be looking to boost India's economic growth in reason. And you also understand, right? India wants to become a developed country by 2047. That is, India wants to become Vikasit Bharat. And for Vikasit Bharat, you need 8 to 10% of annual GDP growth for a 10 to 20 years in general. And what can promote economic growth in India? That is manufacturing sector. Then there is the potential of exports that arise out of manufacturing sector, because India is a net exporter of pharmaceutical products, steel, automobile, and this is all due to the manufacturing sector. As India's medicine, they are in high demand even in Western nations like US. Whereas now India has even started exporting cars to developed countries like Japan. So this highlights that not just it promotes exports out of the country, but it also earns India large amount of foreign currency like US dollars, which is very important if you want to take care of balance of payment in India. Then let us talk about attracting foreign investment, because if you create atmosphere which is conducive for setting up of manufacturing units, it will automatically attract foreign investments from abroad. So not just your companies will try to manufacture, but newer investments will favor larger construction of newer factories, expansion of existing factories, which will not just improve the investment potential of your economy, but it will also drive economic growth in the coming times. Also, for manufacturing, you need large amount of infrastructure, be it roads, bridges, airports, ports, which is dealt with logistic sectors. And also you need to construct many industrial parks and special economic zones. Not just these direct infrastructure which supports industry, but it also leads to creation of housing and urban development projects. All of this leads to huge infrastructure creation in the country, which increases the level of development in the economy. Last but not the least, the manufacturing sector also leads to development of supply chain in India. Because manufacturing sector, it is the sector which links primary sector like agriculture with that of tertiary sector like services, right? So the link between these two is the secondary sector, which is also known as manufacturing sector. So for example, farmers, they are cultivating crops in their farms and they are selling these crops to the food processing industry. And after manufacturing these processed foods, you are selling them in the wholesale markets, which are an example of tertiary sector. So this is how entire supply chain development, that is backward linkages through supply of raw material, as well as forward linkages, that is supplier and distributors, it is developed entirely through India's manufacturing sector. So this is how we understood that there are many important significance of manufacturing sector. And understanding this very significance, the government of India back in mid to the 2010s, it introduced a scheme called as Make in India scheme. And the intention of this scheme was to promote India's manufacturing sector and increase its contribution to GDP from currently 17 to 18% to about 25%. And this was to be achieved by the year 2022. But you'll be surprised to know that even today, India's manufacturing sector, it just contributes to about 17 to 18% of GDP, which has been the case for past 2 decades. And not just this, 70% of India's manufacturing activities, it is concentrated into the unorganized sector, that is small factories which are not readily technologically advanced. Also, in terms of generating employments, what we have seen that the manufacturing units in India, they are not employment intensive, rather they are capital intensive. That is, large amount of production happen, but they happen through machines and through automatic production, which generally does not necessitate high level of employment potential. So this is the shortcoming of India's manufacturing sector, that despite government policy and goal of increasing contribution of manufacturing sector to GDP till about 25%, we still remain at about 17 to 18% of contribution of our manufacturing sector. And this is due to a large set of problems. So let us understand the challenges or issue which plague India's manufacturing sector one by one. For example, I've divided the challenges based on 2 different headings. First is a policy related challenge and the another one is a more fundamental or a structural related challenges. So let us first deal with policy related challenges. The first policy related challenges are known as labor laws. Because we have seen to promote manufacturing in India, Indian government, it consolidated 44 different labor laws and it brought instead just 4 different labor codes in India. But these codes even today, although they were passed back in 2019 to 2020, they still remain to be implemented in each and every state of India. And that is why the compliance and regulatory requirement of labor laws is quite high, which disincentivizes setting up of new manufacturing units. Further, there is a big problem in India related to land acquisition, because setting up of new factories, construction of new infrastructure, all of this would want procurement of newer lands. But when it comes to procurement of lands, the authorities as well as industries, they face numerous problems. These can be absence of particular land records, which leads to various kind of court related disputes, and also that these land acquisition, it faces a large political opposition because you have to compensate the victims or compensate the sellers of the land, which also increases the cost of land acquisition. And because of all these delays, we have seen that the companies, they are rather reluctant to procure new land, and this inhibits the development of newer infrastructure and newer manufacturing setups. Further, as far as R&D is concerned, you need R&D if you want to innovate and technologically advance your manufacturing sector. But as far as research and development activities in India is concerned, the government, it contributes quite high to R&D activities, whereas the private sector, it is not taking so much part in the research and development activities. Understood? So these are the set of problems why there is no adequate levels of research and development, which inhibits the sectoral development, which inhibits innovation as well as technological advancement in the manufacturing sector. Further, the atmosphere for taxation in India is also quite complex, and this is even after the introduction of goods and services tax regime. Because originally GST, it was meant to unify and simplify the indirect tax regime in India. But in practice, what we have seen that there are frequent rate changes, there are frequent compliance procedures that inhibit the companies to ease out the process of compliance with relation to GST. And all of these four factors, they act as a policy level hurdle as far as development and growth of India's manufacturing sector is concerned. Now let us understand a more fundamental set of problems, also known as structural level. Now these kind of words, it can be used in your mains examination if you want to get more marks. If you write structural level problems, automatically you'll get 1 or 2 marks extra in your mains answer writing. So please pay attention to the words that I'm using here, as using these words directly in your answer, it will help you fetch more marks. Now let us talk about the structural or fundamental problems that plague India's manufacturing sector. First is inadequate infrastructure. Now I told you that construction and development of infrastructure is sine qua non if you want to undertake development in your manufacturing sector. But when it comes to presence of port, roads, connectivity, India still lags behind many developed nations. For example, there is a factor called as turnaround time. That means कितनी जल्दी आप ships को turn करो, that is you empty these ships and introduce another ship into the harbor, that is called as turnaround time. So the lesser the turnaround time is, the quicker you empty the load out of a particular ship. So despite many efforts, India is able to reduce the turnaround time of ships. However, it still is much behind the developed ports such as Singapore, Shanghai, etc. So this is how inadequate infrastructure, that is absence of connectivity, lesser amount of time taken to empty the cargo load, it is how it inhibits the development of India's manufacturing sector. Then comes the access to finance. Now here small and medium enterprises, they do not have adequate amount of collateral. So when they go to formal sources like banks and NBFCs, they are unable to secure loans. So in order to meet their finance related needs, which the small and medium enterprise would use it to technologically advance themselves, set up new units, it is met by informal sources which are charging high amount of interest rates and are also not providing them with the adequate credit needs. So this is where access to finance, particularly to small and medium enterprises, it is a big hurdle. Further, as far as India's manufacturing sector is concerned, it comprises of a small amount of large companies and a very big amount of small companies. Whereas for adequate development of manufacturing sector, you need large amount of medium-sized industries, which in India's case is currently absent right now. And this highlights the problem of missing middle. That the companies who are going to employ large amount of people, that is medium sized companies, they are not there, whereas India's manufacturing sector is dominated by small companies which are not so technologically advanced. They are employing less amount of people, and all of this highlights the problem of missing middle. And also, I told you, right, the problems that companies face in lack of R&D, in lack of finance, all of this, it hampers their potential to become technologically more advanced. That is, in order to set up computers, in order to set up automated manufacturing processes, in order to use AI, machine learning for production related activities, you need large amount of R&D. And also you need large amount of finances. But when the companies, they are not doing research and development, they are not getting adequate amount of financing, their technological adoption is hampered. So these are the set of challenges put in total, both policy and structural related challenges that are hampering India's growth potential as far as manufacturing is concerned. And that is why even today we still aren't able to make in India in general. Now, is this the end of the world? The answer obviously is none, because there are many ways in which we still can refurbish India's manufacturing sector. That is, we can promote the growth in India's manufacturing sector, and there are 6 suggestions. First is, let us develop coastal economic zones, because setting up of special economic zones near coastal areas or nearby ports, it can reduce the time taken for delivery of raw material from outside. It can reduce time taken for delivery of finished products to the port so that they can be exported to other countries. And this is how you can develop India's manufacturing sector, because there are many cases, particularly Singapore, Shenzhen in China, Shanghai in China, as well as in many Western nations, we have seen that the industries, they are located in quite close vicinity to coastal areas. And even in India, you'll see higher levels of economic development in industrial centers located in west, such as Maharashtra, or in east, such as Visakhapatnam and Chennai. And all of this highlights one particular thing, that if you start developing coastal areas and set up factories very near to coastal areas, you can achieve improved manufacturing potential. Further is the need to focus on sunrise sector, and for that, electronic sector, semiconductors, textile, food processing, all of this have the potential not just to improve manufacturing levels in the Indian economy, but all of this, it also has the potential to employ large amount of people, particularly textile sector, food processing sector, and that is why we need to focus more on sunrise sector. Further, nurturing startups who are in their initial phases can be quite beneficial, because these startups did not just innovate, but they also spend less amount of money and they result into higher innovation. For example, you must have heard that Paytm पे इतने रुपए प्राप्त हुए, that has been made possible just by the use of sound boxes, right? So you need to manufacture these sound boxes, and that is why startups, they provide an adequate avenue first of all to innovate, and so as to use these innovations to develop manufacturing potential in India, right? Also, there is a need to facilitate investment in the country, and this can be done by improving the climate of ease of doing business, because once you set up necessary infrastructure, you set up adequate industrial areas such as industrial parks and coastal economic zones, it will facilitate higher levels of foreign investment. And with foreign investment, we can not just take care of the finances, but we can also enable technological transfers from outside the country, and it will help develop India's manufacturing sector. And to facilitate investment, we can focus on what is known as plug and play model, that I told you, right? One of the big issues that surrounds or that plagues India's manufacturing sector is land acquisition. So once the government, it undertakes procurement of its land already, and it constructs industrial parks, economic zones in that region, it can facilitate or it can invite companies to just set up their units in these areas. And this is what plug and play model is all about, that you have a ready piece of land, you have a ready piece of infrastructure, and companies just need to set up their manufacturing units, and this will reduce the time from investment till the time you manufacture goods out of those factories. Also, last but not the least, to undertake manufacturing activities, you need a skilled workforce. But we understood, right, the levels of formal skilling in India is just 5%, whereas total about only 15% of India's workforce is skilled in any manner. So as to make these workers skilled, you need Skill India mission. You need these workers to undertake technological advancement courses. You need to get themselves acquainted with how to undertake manufacturing processes, and then only you can be able to scale up the manufacturing potential. Understood? So this is what the importance of manufacturing sector is all about. First, we understood its significance as far as boosting exports, promoting economic growth, generating employment is concerned. Then we understood the various challenges that the government faces even today in scaling up of its manufacturing sector. That despite Make in India program, which originally envisaged contribution of manufacturing till about 25% of GDP, India's manufacturing sector, it plagues at around 17 to 18% of GDP. Then we understood what are the suggestions that could actually improve the potential of our India's manufacturing sector. So please keep watching StudyIQ IS for more such informative videos. and I'll see you again. Until then, a very goodbye from my side.